Welcome back to the Soul Sync podcast. It's me, psychic medium Jason Paul. This is the podcast for curious souls, deep thinkers, recovering overthinkers, and anyone trying to make sense of the parts of themselves they were never taught to understand. Now, today's episode is called The Gifts You Were Never Taught to Understand, ironically. This is a conversation I will say I recorded a little while ago, back in January, with William FitzRoy, and listening back to it now, I find myself hearing it in a completely different way. At the time we recorded this, I was still balancing and stepping between two very different worlds. I was running the business in recruitment, for lawyers I'd built over many years, whilst also trying to make more room for mediumship, my connection with the spirit world, spirituality, and the parts of me that I'd always known the whole time that there was something more beneath the surface. It's just taken me what feels like a long time to get here, I tell you that. So a lot has changed since the time of this recording, and perhaps that is why this conversation feels so relevant to me now, because it is really about what happens when we stop trying to fit into the version of ourselves that feels acceptable to everyone else. Now, you know what I mean by that, don't you? And it's really about starting to become more honest about who we are. So William and I, we talk about sensitivity, intuition, identity, being different, the pressures to hide parts of yourself. And me and William could both relate to that, being gay men, and it was very difficult for both of us in younger parts of our lives. So we also talk about the strange journey of realizing that the qualities you may once have thought were a weakness can actually become part of your strength, and that's very relevant to mediumship, because how many of you listening to this podcast right now have been told that you're too sensitive, been told that you should, just let that go or whatever, and that's really a key thing for sensitive people. I don't want to be around like really stressful or even stressful situations. I want to protect my energy, because especially when we're opening ourselves to mediumship, we're already in a heightened state. And, everyone listening to this podcast is going to be on different levels of sensitivity, but the journey, and if you're unfolding your mediumship, what you are doing is turning up that sensitivity dial. So you do not need to call yourself a medium, a psychic healer, a spiritual person, or anything at all to connect to this episode. But maybe you have always felt things deeply. Maybe you pick up on people's moods before they even say a word. That seems to be a very specialist skill of mine, I tell you that, Soul Sync. So without further ado, this is my conversation with William FitzRoy. So, William FitzRoy, welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with you. Yeah, thanks. I've been kind of making the rounds and having conversations with people that I find interesting. To me, it's all about connection and connecting with other sensitives and other psychics and mediums out there. I think all of us, for a variety of different reasons, may be feeling a little isolated right now, or a little kind of in our own thing. So I've made it a personal mission for myself last year and this year to do a little more sort of reaching out to other people doing the work and having conversations with them in hopes of fostering connection. And I thought being on a podcast is an interesting way to do that, because other people get to kind of witness that and be a part of that conversation.
Why do you think a lot of us, as you say, sensitive people are having a hard time? Why do you feel that is?
Well, maybe that's just because I'm in the United States. And we're certainly having a hard time over here at the moment. I feel like the pressure of kind of what's happening in culture and society and, economically and socially and all that stuff, even though, it's easy to kind of separate oneself from that and find the truth in that and find the growth in that and, say hello to like what's really happening, which is maybe a little less intense or dangerous than sometimes it seems on the surface, just has a tendency to kind of make people feel a little isolated or alone.
Because you are a medium. That's correct, isn't it? So we're both in the same world.
Yeah, so I kind of call myself something different depending on the context, but I do psychic readings, clairvoyant readings. I also work and function as a medium a lot. And then more than all that, and certainly over the last 5 to 10 years, consider myself more of an educator and a teacher because I teach classes and all those things and have a passion for not only sharing what I've learned that sort of helps me in my practice and do what I do, but help other people kind of foster those gifts in whatever way they choose. And that may not be about being a professional medium or a professional psychic, and maybe goals for other things.
How did the spirit first come to touch you? And what was the sort of story behind that, William?
Yeah, I've always been connected to or in communication with, I guess, with spirit, as people would say. I think as a kid or in my childhood, I was very sensitive to energy. I was very sensitive to out of body beings and energies. I had, more imaginary friends than I think my parents knew what to do with. And I think playing with my imaginary friends and being in communication with them, which now I would identify as sort of out of body entities and beings, felt almost more real than the friends I had in school and growing up. So, looking back on my childhood, I think I was always a medium. I just didn't have the language or the context to understand it as such. So what I found was refuge in the arts, which I think a lot of sensitive people do. So got very involved in music and theater and other ways of kind of channeling that creative energy to express. And one thing that's interesting about that I like to share is that I thought everyone did that. So, you know what I mean? So like, here I am, this like super sensitive child who's like communicating with, Mickey Mouse or Elliot from Pete's Dragon, which is a popular Disney film here, thinking that everybody had that kind of communication or that kind of imagination.
Well, you only know your own reality, don't you? And, we all associate that our world is the way the world is. And that's also what limits us a lot in our lives, is our perception of the world. So I can understand if that's your reality, but I'm guessing your parents must have been very accepting and nurturing of this ability of yours rather than shutting it down.
That was a complex situation, but I think they did their best kind of navigating that with me and helping me sort of find community and outlets to, feel safe and supported in that. But I thought all the people, I was like, oh, this is what theater people are like, and then so I started getting really involved in theater and sort of did that all through, grade school and high school and secondary school and all that. And quickly realized no, not all theater people are sensitive. And that's not the common denominator of all this. And as I sort of moved into later adolescence, started to identify that I was gay. And so I was like, oh, so this sensitive, imaginative, communication with spirit thing that I do, this must be what gay people do and are like. And so I moved from identifying this gift as sort of, being attuned to the arts to being attuned with my sexuality and my preferences.
Well, I can relate to that point as well, because it's complex, isn't it? Because I grew up and can understand the sensitivity bit about being gay. I got that as well. There was that whole period of when I was about 11 years old. I thought I liked girls, and then it went over to liking boys. But then I had ADHD in the background, so I was told I was too sensitive. I associated that with being gay as well. So it's I can understand that point, and it's a point that people who may not struggle to understand that world may not realize. But we all live our own reality, even with ADHD. I think everyone's on some spectrum or another. What is normal, William? What is normal?
And aren't we all still trying to figure that out in some way?
We are.
So then I'm kind of taking you through the whole journey here, but then kind of dove oh, this is this thing that I do that I've never understood what it is, that kind of makes me different in my relationships and my point of view and perspective on the world, how I engage, must be because I'm gay. So then it was oh, great. Okay. So I'm gay. So I got really into being gay and the gay community and feeling connection there. But, quickly realized, particularly through dating, that like not all gay people are like this or do this or have this kind of sensitivity and awareness to energy and spirit. So then what happened was that kind of collided with leaving university and moving to the city in my early 20s and kind of starting my own life. And at that point, like really kind of hit what I think some people will call like rock bottom. Like I was like, I don't understand who I am or how I fit into these constructs around me in the world. And all these communities that I had found that I was looking for that answer in had not provided that. So I was really in kind of a rough way at that time and didn't know what was happening to me and kind of felt overwhelmed and overloaded. And I ended up being connected by a roommate that I had at the time to a meditation class that was based on like a technique called psychic meditation. And it's kind of like all using meditation as a tool to be aware of energy. And took that class, and it was a 2-hour class. And an hour into the class, I was sitting there just like with my jaw on the ground. And I remember going up to the teacher at the break, and I was like, I have no idea what this is. And I don't even know what you mean by psychic. Like, I don't understand any of this. But whatever this is what I have been looking for my whole life. Like, no one has ever talked about energy, about spirit, about self-awareness in the terms and construct in which you're presenting here today. I was like, whatever this is, I'm like all in on it.
Why did it hit you so hard in that instant?
Because I think it was a hello to my spirit. Like there was a part of me that was so used to being receptive and aware of energy from others. And part of what these techniques that I learned, and now I sort of teach some stuff based on this, has all to do with not only being sensitive to energy, being sort of receptive, but then also being able to change energy and to affect energy. And I find that a lot of sensitives get overwhelmed and overburdened by that sensitivity because no one's ever taught them. It's kind of like a bicep and a tricep, right? Like how strong you are in sensitivity, you are equally and opposite that strong in your ability to direct and change energy. And so finally having somebody provide that kind of language and context to it, like really felt empowering and like a strong kind of like hello to something inside of me.
It's like in that one moment, it sort of changed the entire direction of your life and everything you were doing in an instant.
Yeah. And, I ended up studying with a bunch of different teachers for about 15 years. And, about 10 years ago, started teaching on my own and really kind of working on relanguaging and sort of integrating psychic and clairvoyant and mediumship tools to be what I feel is like relevant to what I've been calling the new age. I feel like kind of in a new age. And so what we would think of as the new age has kind of passed and ended, and things need to be kind of moved around a little bit.
We'll be right back.
If you find this podcast helpful, please take a moment to spread the word by rating it or reviewing it wherever you listen. What do you think is the general kind of, because obviously in England, we have spiritualist churches. It's a religion here. I've come because I go to courses and there's always so many American people on my courses who are mediums because they don't have that as much in America. So they sort of come over to England to go to the Hogwarts equivalent. How is it fitting into society there? What's it? Are people waking up to it, do you think?
Yeah, and I think part of that work is, like European cultures, and I'm going to include the UK in that, like have a long lineage of that kind of spiritualist tradition. And, America as a country was founded very puritanically and under a very different kind of dogma than I think the rest of Europe has sort of historically. So we have sort of a different relationship to spirituality here, I think. It is more kind of commercial and more third chakra based than
Preferred chakra base.
So
that's certainly one way to put it, isn't it?
like it's kind of a thing you do rather than a thing you are. But that's also a very American kind of ethos.
Yeah, sort of practicing it rather than being it.
Yes.
I can understand that. I guess the very essence of American society is, the American dream. It's materialistic. It's, about the biggest house, the biggest car. That's what success is defined as. It's, that is the DNA of America. So but that's also society is built up on the scarcity mindset, isn't it? That's how society is ordered. So, I could imagine, I think culturally it's interesting. And then you go to the very East and then they have these teachings, which are so, based in the old ways, and it's interesting. So you sort of was talking to me before we got sort of going, so to speak, as one of the things that resonated to you, which was why you reached out, was about the trying to walk with a foot in both worlds and how challenging that is. And I can relate to that totally, because I run a business of my own, which is a full-time job. I'd love to do this kind of thing, full-time, just sit here and talk to lovely people like yourself, William. That'd be very nice. That should be the start of my day, and then as the day goes through. But that is very difficult, and it's very difficult as well when you're being bombarded with, muggle matters all day long, matters of the ego and whatever. And it can be very hard for a sensitive person to live what, is a spiritual life, which I guess is a life with intent, trying to be present, trying to be grounded. How do you navigate this, William, in today's world? It's very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, this is something I have like a particular kind of passion about. When I started this work 20 some years ago, I made a decision at the time that I don't know that I understood what I was doing, but now looking back, I kind of like understand from an older, wiser version of me, kind of why I made some of the choices I made. And that was, I was studying stuff with a lot of people who kind of went, head first all in on spiritual study and spiritual practice and like making this their whole thing. I decided very early on not to do that and to continue having my corporate career alongside of that. Now, I've been freelance my whole career, so and a contractor for people. So like I do intense work for a short amount of time, and then I get the benefit of a few months off in between. So like,
oh, that sounds lovely, William. Sign me up.
It was very nice. But like I've somehow managed to create a rhythm where like these two things don't compete. They kind of work together.
But you manifested that.
I did, but I think that's also because there's something that I'm here to teach about that to people. And to me, what that has to do with is, like I said earlier, the new age. So I'm going to bring this back to my sort of origin story. You think about like 20, 25 years ago, I remember taking my first class on like spirit guides, and I was so scandalized. I was like, oh my God, I can't tell anything in this class, right? Like people are going to think I'm crazy. It was like this kind of
well,
thing.
I don't dare mention what I do at work. I've been told off by my mum for a few times. She works in the same business as me. She said, don't bring the psychic and the medium stuff in. It's your worldview. These people that you manage are 22, 23 there. And I've come to the conclusion that people think I'm mad enough, William, without mentioning that I'm having a psychic download or whatever it might be.
Right. So like, when I think back to that time, like now you go to like Target or Boots or something.
Thank you for making it British. We like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a frequent traveler. When you go to Target or something, they sell like aromatherapy at Target. It's like all the things that were once this kind of like new agey, like what is that? That's like now it's so integrated into pop culture in a certain way that like none of that is really that taboo anymore. And that's why I call it the new age, is because like somehow all that's kind of integrated into the undercurrent of everything. Now, the challenge for people, I think, is how to bring these abilities into your whole life without having to call it that. So, for instance, I'm working with clients all the time. I'm reading people all the time. I'm reading energy. I'm reading energy dynamics. I'm reading all sorts of things all the time. I'm just not telling anybody that I'm doing that while I'm doing it. But that doesn't mean I can't use the information I get from that to inform decisions that I make, ways that I support my clients and my colleagues and the businesses that I work for. It's removing the element of needing anyone else to validate it for you. When you really own something and internalize it, you don't need anyone else to tell you that you're right or to validate that you're doing it well or or that it's valid or important. You kind of just own it and do it. And so integrating those two things requires sort of extracting the need for validation from it and then just sort of being it and doing it and letting that sort of help you and your goals as much as you would help someone else and their goals in a reading or a session.
It's interesting because I can understand you make a very valid point there, because for years I wouldn't know I was a psychic. I would be using psychic skills in my role of recruitment, not realizing that it was psychic skills that I was using. And even when in my days of being a police officer, I would get hunches about things, gut feelings. I wouldn't know, how to describe them in any other way, because at that point I was a atheist. But then even in my job now, I don't say that I'm using it. That's probably the point my mum sometimes, don't start saying that you're having a psychic download. No one understands. How I tell them, But yes, you do blend the two. And why would you not? If you're getting that, you're using, well, to be quite honest, you're using intelligence there. Why would you want to use your head in matters when the head is all about, with the ego, isn't it? It just runs away with you. Why would you want to use that asset of, yourself when you can use your psychic matters? And by blending the two, it's allowing you more to live your soul's plan, isn't it?
Yeah. And to really be integrated and have those abilities and that sensitivity not be something that you just do at the spiritualist church on Sunday, or you just do when somebody's paying you $100 for a reading. It instead becomes this thing that you have and that you deploy and that you use in a variety of different circumstances and settings. And to me, at least in my experience, that's infinitely more validating than giving a reading once a week and having somebody tell me I did a good job and then putting it away and packing it away and then waiting for the next opportunity to do that. Instead, it's kind of like a whole you.
It makes sense, doesn't it? And that's what it should be, rather than this thing that you pack away and put under the stairs. But I guess it's about realizing that, that power that you have is a power that's within you, that's always there, that's ever present. Why would you want to shut that down anyway? But you go through these periods of growth, don't you, with your mediumship and your psychic work. I think what's the journey of becoming a medium is one of healing, and then by virtue of you healing, you go on to heal other people. Oh, what a beautiful cat you've got there in the background. We like that, William. We're cat fans here on the Soul Sync.
Yeah.
So you've been obviously helping people since 2008 with things like energy. How do you go about supporting people, through energy work, and how do you harness that, and how can people help themselves, importantly?
This is where my background in the arts has been incredibly helpful and useful. So I believe and feel very strongly that psychic abilities, mediumship abilities, the ability to sense and shift energy is more like an art than a science. And if you treated it as such, I think people would have better and more access to those abilities within themselves. So I had the good fortune, as I mentioned in my origin story, of spending most of my formative years in artistic conservatory style education programs, both at school, in co-curriculars, and then I went to a university. I studied theater directing and was at a really great conservatory program in university. And what people don't realize about the art, like people who really commit to an art, whether it's ceramics and pottery or visual art or acting, it looks like they're just making stuff up, that it's just sort of coming out of them. But that's not actually true. The ones who are really good at it have a very strong structural foundation in a craft that supports their imagination coming through as the art. So the example that I like to use in this case is like with actors, and this is because I come from theater, so I know how to teach it. For an actor, you memorize your lines. So, and that's like a rote, you got to just sit and like memorize your lines. And then you learn blocking. So you learn like, oh, on this line, I move here, and then this person does this, and then I take that, and you have to memorize all this stuff. And then the really good actors, and I always have to call out, I'm talking about like real actors, not just like celebrities, which is a different thing, like totally different. What we would think of as like masters of this craft, right? You learn all this stuff, you memorize all the moves, you do all the things, and then you get on stage and you forget it. And you let instinct take over because you've already sort of trained your body what to say and where to move and how to do it, right? So you've given your body the structure that it needs to feel safe and do the thing. But then you're also at the same time kind of opening up for inspiration and imagination. It's very real. So having gone through this kind of education my whole life, what I've been doing is how do you apply that same structure and container to something like clairvoyance or mediumship or psychic abilities, and it actually like works really, really well. So what you do is you teach people how to hold energy and how to hold their own energy, almost like a yoga, like a posture, right? And then once you have the foundations of that and your body feels safe and your body feels supported and you feel like, you have tools to rely on. If I see something really weird, what do I do with that? If I see something that makes me uncomfortable as a seer, what do I do? These are all questions that can be answered in a craft and with form. So if you give someone a form and then they learn it, then what happens is you move into the art of it because you have all these tools and these things to fall back on in those moments where you don't know what to do. And that actually gives you more freedom. It's almost paradoxical, Jason, because it's like in order to have freedom, you have to give it first structure.
You do, you do because what you're trying to learn essentially is a habit and a way of being, and you are trying to teach yourself a new way of interacting with the world as well, because to even get to the point of being able to I don't really like using the term successfully meditate, but even to be able to get to the point of quietening one's mind, that could be a nightmare for, well, I say it could be a nightmare for some people. It was a nightmare for me. It took me absolutely ages to be even able to get to that point. But then, you go through these journeys where, again, if you're wanting to live your full potential in life, but you've got a number of limiting beliefs, you want to make a lot of money, it could be, but deep down you have a limiting belief that you're not worth that. Well, you're never going to get it. So you have to go through a lot of this self-work. And I think a lot of the time spirituality and spiritual matters can be glamorized. You see the nice lady sitting there, very white teeth, dazzling, a little sparkle coming off her there, living one's best life, thinking you have to be whiter than white in order to progress. And so I think that a lot of us assume that even when we die, we sort of sat there judged about, do we get to enter the gates of heaven, or are we passed back down to some other murkier level? So there's there's so much judgment out there, William, so much judgment. So how do you go about then? You've got someone who comes to you, a typical American professional who's absolutely lost in, the stress of their career, wanting to come into 2026 to live their best life, wanting to manifest, wanting to take control and to have the happiest life. What would you say to them, William?
Well, you first have to learn how to close your eyes, find the stillness of being, and become aware of your own inner life and sit with that and the complexity of that and the traumas of that. And like you're saying, all that unresolved conflict we have within ourselves that we carry until you get on that healing journey. So many people come to this work wanting to help others, which I think is so noble and so wonderful. And the world needs more healers. I'm not like, I don't think anybody would refute that statement, right?
I agree with that.
But you can't truly heal anyone else until you are healed enough within yourself to be able to sit with someone and have a regulated nervous system and not match or attune to somebody else's panic or stress or freak out or trauma. And so, the way that my academy is structured, it's, short-term classes, 10 weeks, 20 weeks. But the foundational clairvoyant practice is really like a year-long training because it really takes that long. First of all, to learn how to sit with yourself. We've forgotten that as a culture, mostly. Thank you to the internet for that. I don't know about you, but like when I was a kid, I could sit for 6 hours and read a whole book. I was an avid reader as a child. I could go through a book or two in a weekend. Now sitting and reading for 2 hours, like part of me is like, I can't even handle this anymore. It's like it's.
Well, we're just living in a world of just crazy distraction, the shortest attention span imaginable. Yeah, and it's just getting worse. It is getting worse, which is why, I think there needs to be healthy boundaries with one's electronic device.
That's a good first step. But that very directly correlates to something like sitting in meditation and channeling for an hour in a session with somebody. Like that your consciousness, your attention is a musculature. And so you first have to train the muscles to work properly. And, people don't always expect or think that that's, I had a student I was working with recently. I've been working with me for maybe 2 or 3 months and, came to a session and was like, okay, this has been great. But like, when do we get to the good? Like, when do we get to the magic? And I was like, I don't know. That will happen for you when you're ready for it. And I'm just going to sit here and hold the space until one day that happens. But I can't make that happen for you. And you can't make that happen for you. A lot of it is very personalized in that way. There isn't like, and that's similar to acting or painting. You can train and train and train. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh,
you get that moment of inspiration, that download that just comes to you. Yes. It's all very interesting. So it sounds like, with your community that you've got, a large part of everything that you do in your life now is dedicated to helping people in one way or another.
I mean, I also do a bunch of stupid corporate crap. So that's very kind of you to say, Jason. And I'd like to be able to say, yes, that's what it meant. But like, a half or 3/4 of my life is also spent in, meetings with corporate clients who, want me to execute some kind of creative brief or do something like that. And like, there's no sort of surface level spiritual satisfaction with that. But the satisfaction that I get is being able to be myself in those experiences and not feel like I have to become someone else to be in that world.
What's the greatest lesson you feel that the spirit world have ever taught you?
Oh, that's okay. The dynamics of projection and how all that unresolved stuff that I was talking about inside of us, we will project it onto the world or onto other people until we resolve it within ourselves. We never want it to be about us. We always think it's something else doing it to us. And that doesn't mean that like things aren't doing it to us all the time. But when you have sort of your neutrality with that and your space with that, those things become easy to solve and to manage. It's when we get caught with unresolved stuff within ourselves that we project it onto other people and other things and try to avoid it.
Well, you see it all the time, don't you? In people who, it's the world is so bad to me. It's someone else's fault. Or this boss, it's someone else's fault that I haven't got this promotion and whatever. It's, the chip on your shoulder syndrome. And a lot of people live their life in that way. And, I've never been about that. I've always typically had a high level of, drive and knowing that what you put out is what you get back. Well, William, would you like to leave us on a closing thought or monologue or whatever you would like to close your episode of the Soul Sync?
Thank you for relating it back to theater. That is my love language.
Yes.
I think I just really feel like in this new age, this time that we're in and where we're going as human beings on this planet, sharing space, is that being a psychic, being a medium, being sensitive to energy, working with energy, those of us that have been in that have just been ahead of the curve and on the cusp. And it's really time for everyone to wake up to that. And that doesn't mean that everyone has to talk to dead people or everybody has to, learn how to wave their hands around and move energy. It just means that connection to that ability you have within yourself to change energy in you and around you. And everyone has that ability. And I just get really excited when I see people that wouldn't normally consider themselves psychics or clairvoyants or mediums having a psychic or a clairvoyant or a mediumship experience and starting to understand that this is part of our human lineage and this is part of what everyone gets to have in the human experience. And I think that's very exciting.
Well, William, thank you very much for coming on to the Soul Sync. It's a delight to talk to you.
Yeah, this was so fun. Thanks for connecting with me and for answering my email.
Oh, he really made me laugh and smile a lot there. I really liked talking to William. And it reminded me of when I went to Chicago a couple of years ago with my mum for my birthday. And I absolutely loved it there. But she just kept saying to me the whole time, my feet are hurting. We've walked too much. And there was me sort of looking at my Apple Watch, celebrating that we'd done 20,000 steps. And she was not liking it, I'll tell you that. Do remember you can sign up to my new newsletter. I've only sent one so far. And quite a few of you emailed back to say you like it, so thanks for that. If you do want to sign up to it, just go to my website, jasonpaulmedium.com. Down at the bottom of the home page you can sign up there. And what I do owe you is a mediumship episode, and the next episode I'm working on is an update about my mediumship. And let me tell you, it's unfolding at the rate of knots at the moment, it seems like, after having a dry spell of not doing a lot of it for about 6 weeks. But I'm going to tell you all about that on the next episode. So until then, lots of love.